Welcome to the Sky Commander Flight Brief. It's your mission-ready podcast for drone pilot training and aerial insights across Canada.
From Transport Canada rules to real-world drone ops, we break it down, take you higher, and help you earn your wings. Because here at skycommander.ca, we don't just fly.
It hints there's more to it. It's a masterclass, a deeper level, maybe a philosophy or a community focus, perhaps.
It's definitely intriguing, sets them apart from just, a basic tips show. Skycommander.ca is the obvious next step. Precisely. If you're thinking about flying a drone in Canada, boom, this content is aimed right at you.
Powered by skycommander.ca.
The elite podcast for Canada's drone pilot. Okay, let's get started.
Okay, let's unpack this. If you are operating any kind of aircraft, from a big airline jet right down to a small professional drone.
Yeah.
Understanding these, invisible fences in the sky.
Yeah.
It's not just recommended.
Oh, absolutely. It's the absolute non-negotiable foundation of everything you do.
Right. But for a lot of pilots, maybe especially drone pilots getting into this, diving into the rule book feels like swimming in alphabet soup.
Yeah.
Just restrictions everywhere.
It's totally overwhelming, isn't it? You immediately hit TFR, MOA, CYR, SFRA, LANC. You have to make sense of it all, instantly.
Yeah.
So our mission today, this depth dive, is really focused on cutting through some of that confusion, specifically around Special Use Airspace, SUA, and temporary flight restrictions, TFRs.
And we've looked at a bunch of sources, right? Official FAA stuff, Transport Canada, regs, pilot guides.
Exactly. Pulled together a pretty comprehensive kind of no-bust framework based on all that, things you can actually use.
Good. Because we want to deliver actionable knowledge.
Yeah.
And quickly. The stakes here are just incredibly high, violating certain airspace. I mean, it isn't just a slap on the wrist or a fine.
No, it can mean losing your certificate.
Yeah.
Immediately. Or worse, frankly.
So all these acronyms, they really just boil down to defining two critical things for you, the operator, where you absolutely cannot go, or where you must contact someone and coordinate things before you even think about launching.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll walk you through the hierarchy, right? The different levels of these restrictions, and really try to highlight the sometimes subtle but really important operational differences, especially between the U.S. and Canada.
Yeah, those cross-border differences can really catch you out. Okay, so let's start with the basics, maybe the more static restrictions, the ones you usually see on aeronautical charts. That whole category is known as Special Use Airspace, or SUA.
Right.
SUA. And the official definition, if you look in the AM, the Aeronautical Information Manual, Section 3.4, it basically says these are places where normal flight operations are limited or restricted.
And why? Usually national security, maybe military training.
Or sometimes identified hazards, yeah, things like that.
Okay, and what jumps out right away from all the material is this idea of a hierarchy within SUA. You can't just treat all restricted airspaces the same way.
Definitely not. They fall into two really different buckets, regulatory and non-regulatory.
And that difference isn't just, jargon, it's crucial. It's the difference between maybe a warning and a major violation.
Precisely. Regulatory SUAs. Those are the hard rules. They're covered specifically under the federal regulations, 14 CFR Part 73 in the U.S.
Okay. Part 73.
These are the ones where entry, when they're active, is just strictly prohibited, full stop, unless you have explicit, usually written authorization from whoever controls that airspace, the controlling agency.
Okay, so let's break down those regulatory types. First one. Prohibited areas. They're labeled P-something, right? Like P-56 over the White House?
Exactly. P-56, P-40 over Camp David. Those are the classic examples. Flight there is just fundamentally prohibited. Always.
And getting permission. Is that even feasible for most operators?
Honestly, the authorization process is so difficult and so rare for most commercial folks, especially drone operators. Just treat them as permanent no-fly zones. Don't even think about it.
Got it. Permanent no-go. What's the other regulatory type?
Restricted areas. These are labeled R- and then numbers, like R #####. Now, entry here is also prohibited, but, and this is key, only when the area is active.
Okay, so they're not always off limits.
Correct. The sources really stress that restricted areas are mainly used to contain operations that could be hazardous to aircraft that aren't part of whatever's going on. Think artillery fire, guided missiles, maybe some unusual flight testing.
Stuff you definitely don't want to fly through.
Exactly. So if the schedule says the area is hot, meaning active, you stay out, period. But if it's scheduled cold or inactive, you can legally fly through it.
But you have to check first.
Always. You are absolutely responsible for checking the active status with the controlling agency. Their contact info is usually listed right on the chart or on the FAA's SUA website. Making that call, logging that call, it's vital. It's how you avoid certificate action.
Okay, so that's regulatory. Prohibited, always off, and restricted, off when active, check first. What about the other category, non-regulatory?
All right. Non-regulatory SUAs. These are more advisory. Technically, entry might be legal, especially for VFR traffic, but operationally, they present significant risks, sometimes really intolerable risks.
So legal doesn't mean safe.
Not at all. These areas are designed more for safety awareness, giving you a heads up rather than outright prohibition.
Okay, what are the main types here?
The big one is probably military operations areas, or MOAs. You see these charted quite a bit.
MOAs, right.
These designate airspace where military aircraft and civilian aircraft might be sharing the same space. And typically, the military is doing things like high-speed maneuvers, high-G turns, often below 10,000 feet.
Things that make them hard to see and avoid.
Very hard. Now, legally, you can fly through an active MOA under visual flight rules if you're a manned aircraft. And Part 107 doesn't explicitly forbid drone entry either. But the risk of a mid-air collision, especially with fast-moving jets, it goes way, way up.
So what's the responsible thing to do?
The responsible action, the professional action, is always to call the controlling agency. Ask them if the MOA is hot or cold. Even if the law doesn't strictly require you to get permission, knowing the status is just smart risk management. Log that call too.
Okay, MOAs. What else is non-regulatory?
You also have warning areas. These usually start 3 nautical miles offshore and cover hazards over the ocean. And alert areas, which basically warn you about a high volume of pilot training activity. Think near military bases or big flight schools.
So areas where you just need to be extra vigilant, looking around constantly.
Exactly. Extreme vigilance, keep your head on a swivel, constant scanning. But they don't typically require you to call ahead or get permission.
Yeah. And there was one more, CFAs, controlled firing areas.
Ah, yes, CFAs. These are kind of unique. What's interesting based on the source material is that CFAs are often not charted on maps.
Not charted? Why? That seems counterintuitive.
It's by design, apparently. The activity happening inside a CFA could be rifle practice, small demolitions, that sort of thing, is required by regulation to stop immediately if any non-participating aircraft is spotted, visually or electronically.
So the burden is on the people on the ground doing the firing, not on the pilot to check a chart or NOTAM.
Precisely. It transfers the responsibility for spotting and ceasing activity onto the ground crew. That way, aviation isn't constantly being routed around potentially small, intermittent ground activities.
But that means as a pilot, especially flying low altitude like a drone often does, you'd never even know if you were flying over an active CFA.
Correct. You wouldn't know beforehand, which forces you to basically assume that these kinds of activities could be happening, especially in more remote areas.
Wow. It really underscores that point. Having the legal right-of-way doesn't mean much if the folks on the ground don't see you in time when things are happening fast.
It really does. So that's the SUA hierarchy in a nutshell. Regulatory areas, check first or stay out. Non-regulatory,
Yeah.
legal perhaps, but requires serious thought about risk.
Okay, that covers the sort of fixed geography of restrictions. But often the biggest headache, especially for drone pilots doing timely work, isn't the stuff on the chart. It's the sudden, temporary changes, the real pop-up fences.
Ah, yes, temporary flight restrictions. TFRs. These are established under a different rule, 14 CFR 91.137, and they're issued via NOTAM's Notice to Airmen, or now Notice to Air Missions.
Right, NOTAMs.
They're designed to manage risk around short-term, often high-impact events. They are definitely temporary, yes, but for the time they're active, you absolutely must treat them as if they're a permanent, final rule.
No messing around.
None.
And what kind of events triggered TFRs?
Okay.
You see them pop up for wildfires, right?
Absolutely. Aerial firefighting is a huge one. Also, disaster relief efforts, like after a hurricane, big public gatherings, think the Super Bowl or major political conventions.
VAP movement, that's another big one. Presidential travel especially.
Definitely. And space operations too, rocket launches, re-entry corridors. Basically anything where having unexpected aircraft buzzing around would be dangerous or interfere with critical operations. TFRs keep the looky-loos out, essentially.
So the rule itself, 91.137, what does it actually say?
It's actually quite simple and direct. It says, no person can operate an aircraft within the area defined by the TFR NOTAM unless they are specifically authorized by air traffic control or whatever agency is controlling the TFR operations. It's a straightforward ban.
Okay. Now, the source material mentioned an anecdote about Mount St. Helens.
Ah, yeah, that's a great illustration of how TFRs work and the other risks involved.
Tell us about that. So St. Helens was active, venting steam and ash.
Right. This is back when it was quite active. And authorities put up a TFR to manage the airspace, keep sightseers safe and out of the way of scientific flights. But, and here's the key detail, the TFR only went up to 12,500 feet MSL. It had a defined ceiling.
Okay, so it didn't go up indefinitely.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
this flight instructor and pilot, they wanted to observe the volcano, but safely and legally. They saw the TFR ceiling was 12,500 feet. So they contacted the controlling frequency, announced who they were and what they were doing, and they flew above the TFR. Perfectly legal.
Aren't. They used the rules. But there was a catch.
There was an operational consequence. While they were up there, above 12,500 feet, coordinating on the radio focused on the procedures, the pilot started experiencing symptoms of hypoxia, lack of oxygen.
Because they were high up, unpressurized, and maybe distracted by the workload of flying right at the edge of a restricted area.
Precisely. The complex coordination, the focus on staying legal, distracted from basic physiological needs at that altitude. It just drives home the point. Finding a legal loophole like flying over a TFR doesn't mean all the risk magically disappears.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it underlines why you absolutely must check the official parameters of any TFR.
And not just check them, but check them from the official sources. TFR.aaa.gov is the key one in the US right before you launch. Things can change fast.
That final check needs to be really careful, doesn't it? How do pilots make sure they don't miss anything in that dense NOTAM text?
Well, pros often use a mnemonic to make sure they hit all the key points. It's RTASU.
RTASU. Okay, break that down for us.
Sure. R is for reason. Why is the TFR there? Is it for firefighting? VIP. A stadium event. Knowing the reason helps you understand the context.
Makes sense. T.
T's is for times. When is it active? This is a classic gotcha because TFR times are always published in Zulu Time Coordinated Universal Time, UTC.
Right, not local time.
Not local time. If you're on the East Coast and you forget that 5-hour difference or whatever it is for your location, you could easily think you're clear when you're actually right in the middle of the active period. Big mistake.
Okay, RTA.
A is for altitudes. What are the vertical limits? And critically, are they published in MSL means sea level or AGL above ground level?
The MSL AGL trap. We'll definitely dig into that more later.
Yeah.
That sounds crucial.
It's huge. Get that wrong, and you could be flying right through the restricted airspace without even realizing it.
Okay. RTS.
S is for shape. What's the lateral boundary? Is it a simple circle with a specific radius from a point? Or is it a complex polygon defined by latitude and longitude coordinates? You need to plot that shape accurately on your map.
Right. Can't just guess the area. And finally, U.
U is for users authorized, who is allowed in. Sometimes the NOTAM will explicitly state who can enter. Maybe it's aircraft operating in direct support of firefighting, or approved public safety UAS with call sign XYZ.
So if you're not on that list,
You are banned. Simple as that. So failing to verify any one of those 5 things, reason, times, altitudes, shape, users using RTSU, that's pretty much an instant compliance bust if something goes wrong. Okay, moving from those general TFRs, let's talk about some specific, more enduring security restrictions. The big one that affects drone pilots everywhere in the U.S. is the nationwide stadium TFR.
yeah, the stadium rule. Officially, that's FDC 43621, right? It's kind of unique because it's always there, but only activates at certain times.
Exactly. It's like a standing template. It comes under 14 CFR section 99.7. That's the part dealing with special security instructions. The FAA uses this authority for national security purposes.
And the idea is to protect those huge crowds at major sporting events from potential aerial threats.
Right. And the details here are non-negotiable. Every pilot needs to know these cold. The restricted area is a 3 nautical mile radius around the stadium or venue.
3 nautical miles. Okay. And how high does it go?
Up to 3,000 feet above ground level.
Yeah.
So 3 nm radius, 3,000 feet AGL ceiling.
And the timing. When does it switch on and off?
It activates 1 hour before the event's scheduled start time, and it stays active until 1 hour after the event officially ends.
1 hour before to 1 hour after. Got it. Now, does this apply to every game? Like my local high school football game?
No, that's a really important distinction. It applies specifically to major league sports. So MLB baseball, NFL football, NCAA Division I, college football.
Only the big DI games for college football?
Correct. And major motor speedway events like NASCAR Cup races or IndyCar, it does not automatically cover high school games or even smaller college division games.
So if you're hired to get some B-roll for a big high school rivalry game, that nationwide 3NM TFR isn't active. But you still need to check, right?
Absolutely. You still have to check for any specific local NOTAMs that might have been issued just for that event, but the automatic nationwide rule doesn't apply there. It's based on the type and level of the event, the security coordination involved, not just the crowd size.
Okay, that's clear. Now let's talk about the Mount Everest of restricted airspace, at least for UAS in the U.S., Washington, D.C.
The DC SFRA and FRZ. Yeah, that is the absolute definition of assume the answer is no.
SFRA? FRZ. What's the structure there?
It's basically layers of protection around the capital. You have the outer ring, which is the 30 nautical mile radius special flight rules area, the SFRA.
30 miles out. That's a big area.
It is. And then inside that, there's an even more restrictive core. The 15 nautical mile radius flight restricted zone, the FRZ, centered roughly on the Washington Monument.
Okay, so 30 is the outer ring, 15 is the inner freeze zone. It's a good way to remember it.
Yeah, 30 is the ring, 15 is the freeze. Essential mnemonic if you're anywhere near DC. And for drones, especially inside that inner 15-mile FRZ, the policy is basically zero tolerance.
So the rule is just don't fly.
Pretty much no entry unless you have somehow managed to secure a very specific, very hard-to-get waiver directly from the TSA and the FAA.
And those waivers aren't like getting a simple LANC authorization, I assume?
Not even close. They're incredibly rare, typically reserved for high-level government or critical infrastructure missions. And if you do get one, it will spell out every single condition. Exact altitude, exact flight path down to the meter, the precise time window, often direct communication requirements. It's intense.
So attempting to fly a drone recreationally, or even for most commercial jobs, inside the FRZ without that explicit multi-agency piece of paper.
That's a fast track to serious federal enforcement, confiscation, fines, certificate action. Just don't do it.
Okay. Now that Section 99.7 authority, the special security instructions, it's not just for stadiums in D.C., is it?
No, the FAA uses that same authority to create permanent security-driven flight restrictions over other sensitive locations, too. Think certain nuclear power plants, maybe major dams or reservoirs, key government buildings outside of D.C.
Fixed-site critical infrastructure that needs ongoing aerial protection.
Exactly. And these aren't always obvious just by looking at a map. They're published in a specific data set called the National Security UAS Flight Restrictions Dataset.
Okay, so pilots need to check that data set as part of their planning.
If you're operating professionally, yes. If a polygon from that dataset covers your proposed job site, you have to treat it as prohibited airspace for drones.
And getting permission there.
Again, it requires explicit federal authorization specific to that site's restriction. It can be a complex process involving different agencies. You can't just call the local air traffic control tower for these. You're dealing with national security folks.
Right. Higher level coordination. Okay, now let's pivot to something you mentioned earlier, that the source material flags as maybe the most common technical error.
The altitude trap.
The altitude trap. The difference between AGL and MSL.
Yes. It's insidious, honestly, because it catches everyone, manned pilots, drone pilots, beginners, experienced pros.
So why is it so tricky? Remind us of the basic difference.
Okay, so aviation charts, the sectionals, the terminal area charts, they almost always show altitudes in mean sea level MSL. That's height above a theoretical average sea level.
Maps show levels.
Right. But drone rules, especially Part 107, usually talk about limits in above ground level, AGL. That's your height directly above the terrain or the structure right underneath you.
Ground is local, AGL.
Exactly. So you're constantly dealing with these two different reference points. MSL is absolute altitude based on sea level. AGL is relative altitude based on the ground below you.
Okay, I get the difference. But why does that become a regulatory trap?
Because the floors and ceilings of controlled airspace, restricted areas, TFRs, they are almost always defined in MSL in the official publications and charts.
Okay, so the restriction is in MSL, but my drone limit is in AGL. Let's walk through an example, like the one in the source. Say I'm in a hilly area.
Right. Imagine you're setting up for a drone job, maybe an inspection, in a mountainous region. Your launch site elevation where you're standing is, let's say, 5,500 feet MSL. Pretty high up.
Okay, 5,500 feet above sea level. Then suddenly a TFR pops up nearby. Maybe a VIP is flying into a local airport.
Exactly. You pull the NOTAM for the TFR and you read the critical line. Restriction effective from surface SFC up to 4,000 feet MSL.
SFC to 4,000 MSL.
Okay. Now here's the trap. You're standing at 5,500 feet MSL. You see the TFR ceiling is 4,000 feet MSL. What's your first quick thought?
Well, 4,000 is lower than 5,500, so maybe I'm above the whole thing. Maybe it doesn't affect me way up here.
That's the common and catastrophically wrong assumption.
Wrong. But the ceiling is below me. How can I be restricted by airspaces underneath my feet?
Because the restriction isn't just the ceiling, it's the entire volume of air from the surface up to 4,000 feet MSL. Since your ground level is 5,500 MSL, you are currently standing 1,500 feet above the TFR's ceiling.
Okay.
So the restricted airspace, the block from SFC up to 4,000 MSL, exists entirely below your altitude. But the crucial point is, you are launching from the surface within the lateral boundaries of the TFR. And any flight you make, even if you only go up 10 feet AGL, starts from the surface within that TFR's defined lateral area and is therefore inside the restricted volume, SFC to 4,000 MSL, even though your altitude AGL is low.
Wait, let me get this straight. Even though I'm standing way above the 4,000-foot MSL ceiling, because the TFR covers the ground location where I am, launching from that ground means I'm immediately inside the restricted zone from the moment I lift off.
That's exactly it. The restriction applies from the surface up. Since you are launching from the surface at 4,500 MSL and the restriction covers everything below 4,000 MSL in that spot, you are technically starting inside the restriction the moment your drone leaves the ground. You'd be violating the TFR by flying even 1 foot off the ground.
Wow. That is a huge trap. It completely flips the intuitive understanding. It requires reading that NOTAM incredibly carefully. If it had said SFC to 4,000 AGL, it would be totally different.
Totally different. But because it's specified MSL, it creates this invisible restricted shelf, sometimes even below your launch altitude, that you still can't enter from the surface within the TFR boundary.
So it's the takeaway. How do pilots avoid this?
The professional approach, the only safe approach, is to explicitly convert and document everything before you fly. Calculate your maximum planned flight altitude in both AGL and MSL.
Okay, so if my max height is 250 feet AGL and my launch site is 5,420 feet MSL.
Then your highest point will be 5,420 plus 250, which is 5,670 feet MSL.
Right.
Now you take that 5,670 MSL figure and compare it carefully against the MSL floors and ceilings of any nearby TFRs, restricted areas, Class B airspace shelves, whatever. You need to ensure you have a clear, documented margin of safety, both vertically and laterally, based on the MSL values.
That constant conversion and double-checking, it sounds tedious but non-negotiable.
Absolutely non-negotiable. It's fundamental airmanship, whether you're flying a drone or a Boeing 747.
Okay, that need for really careful checking, understanding where the rules meet the operational reality. It leads us right into what the source material calls maybe the biggest misconception in drone operations today.
Ah, yes. The idea that LANC is some kind of universal key to the sky.
Exactly. LANC, that's low altitude authorization and notification capability. The belief that getting an LANC authorization means you're good to go no matter what.
It's just not true. LANC is incredibly useful, revolutionary even, but it solves one specific problem.
And that problem is?
Getting fast, systematic permission to operate your drone in controlled airspace. Specifically, Class B, Class C, Class D, and the surface areas of Class E airspace, usually around airports.
Right, the places where ATC is actively managing manned aircraft traffic.
Exactly. Now, to understand LANC, you first need to understand the data it uses. That's the UAS facility maps, or UASFM.
UASFM. Okay, what are those?
They're essentially pre-coordination maps created by the air traffic controllers at each facility. They show grid squares overlaid on the airspace around the airport. And each grid square has a maximum altitude printed on it, usually in 50-foot increments, going up to a ceiling of 400 feet AGL. This altitude represents the height ATC has predetermined is likely safe for drone operations in that specific spot without needing extra coordination.
So the map shows, like, 100 feet in this square, 200 feet in the next square over.
Precisely. But, and this is really crucial, those UASFM maps, those altitude numbers, they are just data. They are hints from ATC. They are not authorizations by themselves.
Ah, okay. They're just telling you what the pre-approved ceiling is likely to be for an automated approval.
Correct. So for Part 107 pilots wanting to fly in controlled airspace, if you request an altitude at or below the UASFM grid value for your location, the LANC system can often grant you an automated near-instant approval.
That's the standard LANC process most people are familiar with. But what if the map says 100 feet and you need to fly higher, say up to the legal 400 feet AGL limit for your job?
That's where the further coordination process comes in. You submit your request through a LANC provider, asking for an altitude above the published UASFM grid value up to that 400 AGL maximum.
And that goes where? Does the computer still handle it?
No. Further coordination triggers a manual review. Your request gets routed directly to the air traffic controllers in the tower at that airport.
A human looks at it.
A human looks at it.
Yeah.
They assess the current traffic, their workload, the specifics of your request, and they decide whether to approve it, modify it, or deny it. It is entirely dependent on their workload.
Meaning, if they're swamped with landings and takeoffs.
Your request might just get automatically canceled if they don't have time to review it before your requested start time, typically within 24 hours. Further coordination is absolutely not guaranteed. It's asking for an exception to the automated safety ceiling.
Okay. So LANC itself is the system that uses these UASFM maps to give you the actual authorization.
Yes. LANC is the infrastructure. It works through approved private companies, the UAS service suppliers, or USS. You use their app, make your request, and if approved, either automatically based on UASFM or manually via further coordination, you get back that official FAA authorization, usually with a 9-digit code.
And who can use LANC?
It's available for both Part 107 certified pilots and for recreational flyers operating under the statutory exception, 44809.
But there's a difference in how they can use it.
Yes. Recreational flyers are strictly limited to the pre-approved UASFM grid altitudes. They cannot request further coordination for higher altitudes. Only Part 107 pilots can do that.
Got it. And is LANC available everywhere now?
The coverage has expanded dramatically, which is fantastic. It includes most FAA towers and even many federal contract towers at smaller airports. However, and this is important, some sensitive airspace, particularly areas controlled by the Department of Defense or military facilities, might not participate in the LANC.
So if you need to fly in controlled airspace near a military base,
you might still need to go through the older, slower manual application process using the FAA's Drone Zone portal. Always check the FAA's LANC coverage maps first.
Okay, now let's get back to that core misconception. This is where it gets really interesting, as you said. Let's say I do everything right. I use a LANC app. I request 200 feet AGL in a Class D zone. The UASFM map shows 200 feet is fine. And boom, I get my 9-digit FAA authorization code back. That's proof the FAA said I can fly right.
It's proof the FAA said you can fly in that controlled airspace up to that altitude. That's all it proves.
But how can a TFR then stop me if the FAA gave me a code?
Because you have to think of airspace authorizations like layers or filters. And the most restrictive layer always wins. Always.
Okay, layer.
LANC approval deals with one specific layer, the requirement to get permission to enter controlled airspace, Class B, C, D, E surface, where ATC needs to know about you. It addresses Title 14 CFR Part 107's Section 107.41. That's it.
So LANC gets me past the controlled airspace gatekeeper.
Exactly. But it does not, and I really want to stress this, it never overrides other more restrictive layers. It doesn't override a TFR issued under 91.137. It doesn't override an active restricted area, R###. It doesn't override a prohibited area, P###. And it doesn't override those Section 99.7 special security instructions like the stadium TFR or the fixed site restriction.
Oh, wow. Okay, so my LAANC code is basically permission from ATC for the altitude in their airspace. But it offers zero protection if a higher authority restriction is in place, like a VIP TFR.
Zero protection. Think of it this way. LANC gives you permission to use the altitude, assuming the location itself is available. The TFR or restricted area makes the location unavailable, period.
So if I have my green light, my LANC code for 200 feet AGL ready to launch, and then I do my final check and see a brand new TFR just popped up covering my area, say SFC to 1,000 feet AGL for a presidential visit.
Your LANC authorization is instantly irrelevant for the duration of that TFR. You cannot launch. You must stand down immediately, even with that valid FAA code in your hand.
TFR trumps the LANC.
The TFR trumps the LANC. The restricted area trumps the LANC. The prohibited area trumps the LANC. The Section 99.7 security band trumps the LANC. Every time.
So the operational priority has to be check for the big closures first.
Absolutely. Step 1. Is the airspace fundamentally closed by a TFR, a prohibited restricted area, or a security rule? Check official sources, tfr.faa.gov, SUA schedules, Section 99.7 data. If the answer is yes, stop. If the answer is no, then proceed to step 2. Do I also need controlled airspace authorization via LANC or Drone Zone?
Check the big locks first, then worry about the controlled airspace key.
That's a perfect way to put it. Failing to follow that sequence, assuming LANC is the only key needed, is probably the single biggest reason commercial drone operators get busted for airspace violations.
Okay, this layering concept is critical. Now let's talk about operating near the border, or for folks who might work in both the US and Canada. The source material really highlighted some key differences in rules, these cross-border gotchas.
Oh, they really are gotchas. The regulatory philosophies between the FAA in the US and Transport Canada, TC, can diverge in some really significant ways. And if you just assume the rules are the same, you can get into trouble fast.
Where's the biggest difference? What's the number one thing people need to watch out for?
Based on the sources, probably the wildfire rule, how each country handles airspace restrictions around active wildfires.
Okay, how does it work in the US? We touched on TFRs.
Right. In the US, if there's a wildfire and they need to manage the airspace for firefighting aircraft, the authorities issue a specific wildfire, TFR. It'll pop up on the TFR map, defined under 91.137. You check the official TFR system if there's no TFR published for that fire.
Then legally, there's no federal airspace closure. You could technically fly, though maybe it's not smart.
Legally, yes. No TFR means no federal closure. Obviously, extreme caution is warranted near any fire, but the restriction itself hinges on that TFR being issued via NOTAM.
Okay. Now, how does Canada handle wildfires? Is it the same TFR NOTAM system?
Yeah.
No, and this is the huge gotcha. Canada operates under completely different principle. Presumption of restriction.
Presumption of restriction, what does that mean?
It means their regulation, specifically Canadian Aviation Regulation, or CAR 601.15, establishes an automatic airspace restriction around forest fires. You don't need to wait for a NOTAM.
Automatic. So the rule itself acts like a TFR.
Exactly. CARS 601.15 states it's prohibited to fly any aircraft below 3,000 feet AGL within 5 nautical miles of a forest fire boundary, period, even if no NOTAM has been issued.
Wow. Okay, 3,000 feet AGL, 5 nautical miles, automatic closure. That's a massive difference.
It's huge. Imagine a U.S.-trained pilot operating in Canada. They see smoke, they check their usual NOTAM apps, they see nothing published.
And they think, okay, I'm clear to fly my drone mission nearby.
Right. But legally, under CARS 601.15, they are busting a regulation the second they fly within that 5 NM 3000 AGL zone. Unless they're specifically authorized as part of the official firefighting operation. If you're not part of that response effort, you are banned by the regulation itself.
So in Canada, near a fire, you can't assume clear skies just because there's no NOTAM. The regulation is the restriction.
Precisely. That's the definition of a regulatory gotcha waiting to happen if you're not aware of that fundamental difference.
Okay, wildfire rules. U.S. needs a TFR. Canada has an automatic ban. What about military airspace? We talked about MOAs in the U.S.
Right. U.S. military operations areas, MOAs, non-regulatory. Legal to enter under Part 107, but risky. The best practice is to call the controlling agency, check if it's hot or cold.
How does Canada handle similar military training areas?
Canada uses their Class F airspace structure. For military activity, it's typically designated as a CYA, a Class F advisory area with military operations.
CYM. And how does that compare to a U.S. MOA?
Functionally, it behaves very similarly. Entry isn't legally prohibited for VFR traffic, but just like an MOA, it's high risk. Prudence dictates you coordinate.
So same best practice. Call the contact listed, find out the status, try to operate when it's cold.
Exactly. The source material really emphasizes for both MOAs and CYMs. Just because it's legal to enter doesn't mean it's safe or smart. The pilot's risk management duty is key in both countries. Don't just barge in.
Makes sense. Okay, what about big events? Like the stadium rule difference?
Another significant divergence. The U.S. has that blanket nationwide stadium TFR we discussed, FDC 43621, 3 nautical miles, 3,000 feet AGL, 1 hour before to 1 hour after for those major league sports and big races. It's predictable because it's always the same rule under Section 99.7 security instructions.
Right, that template rule. Does Canada have an equivalent, a standard rule for, say, CFL games or major concerts?
No. There is no blanket national stadium TFR rule in Canada.
Really? So how do they restrict airspace for big events if needed?
It's done on a case-by-case basis. If they need to close airspace for a specific large event, they will issue a specific temporary NOTAM for it, or potentially use a special order under Section 5.1 of their Aeronautics Act.
Section 5.1.
So you cannot just assume the U.S. 3NM 3,000-foot rule applies to a Toronto Raptors game or the Calgary Stampede. You absolutely must check for a specific NOTAM or a Section 5.1 order related to that event.
And if there isn't one, is there any general guidance?
Transport Canada guidance generally just advises pilots to exercise prudence and stay away from heavily advertised events where crowds gather. But the actual legal restriction, if any, comes only from that specific NOTAM or S.5.1 order.
So again, reliance on specific temporary notices in Canada versus a standing rule in the U.S. for these types of events.
Correct, different approaches.
Finally, just the basic classification. The U.S. uses P for prohibited, R for restricted, MOA, warning, alert. Canada uses something different.
Yeah, Canada structures its special use airspace under the umbrella of Class F.
Class F. Okay.
Within Class F, you have different types, indicated by a letter. CYR is Class F restricted, similar to a U.S. restricted area. CYD is Class F danger, often used for offshore hazards, somewhat like a U.S. warning area. And CYA is Class F advisory, which includes those military CYM areas we talked about, but also other advisory areas.
FUYR, CYD. CYA, all under the Class F umbrella. And where do Canadian pilots find the official details for these Class F areas, like schedules and controlling agencies?
The definitive source in Canada is the Designated Airspace Handbook, or DAH. It's updated regularly on a standard 56-day cycle, similar to how U.S. charts update.
The DAH. Got it. And just to connect back to the LANC discussion, Canada has its own system for controlled airspace authorization, right? NA drone.
Yes, NAB drone is Canada's equivalent to LAANC, providing access to controlled airspace. But the same principle applies as in the U.S., meaning NAV drone authorization is only for accessing controlled airspace, typically Class C, D, or E around airports. It absolutely does not override a Class F restriction like a CYR or a CYD or one of those special S.5.1 orders. The stricter rule, the Class F restriction or the S.5.1 ban, always wins over the NAV drone permission.
The stacking principle holds true north of the border, too. Check the big restrictions first.
Always.
Okay, we've covered a ton of ground. The rules, the U.S. versus Canada differences, the big traps like MSL-EGL, and the LAANC misconception. Now, let's try to synthesize this. How does a professional pilot put this all together into a reliable workflow, a strategy to avoid busting these rules?
Right. It's not just about knowing the rules. It's about having a systematic process. The source material suggests a kind of two-layer check. Think strategic and tactical.
Strategic and tactical. Okay, what's the strategic phase?
Strategic planning happens maybe days or even weeks before the mission. It's about gathering intelligence on the more static or predictable restrictions that might affect your area.
So what kind of things are you checking then?
You're looking at the FAA's SUAA website, suaa.faa.gov, or Canada's DAH, checking the published schedules for restricted areas, our hashtag or CYRs, and MOAs, or CYMMs. When are they typically active? Who is the controlling agency? Get those contact numbers ready.
Okay, checking the known SUA schedules. What else?
You'd also scan for those known fixed site security restrictions, checking that Section 99.7 data set we mentioned for any permanent drone-restricted zones over critical infrastructure near your site.
Right, the power plants, dams, etc.
Exactly. And you'd also look at known calendars. Is there a Major League Baseball game scheduled nearby? Is there a known VIP visit planned for the area, even if the TFR isn't published yet? It's about anticipating potential closures based on known events.
So strategic is about the knowns and the likely knowns, looking ahead.
Precisely. Then comes the tactical check. This is the absolute must-do final compliance gate.
And when does this happen?
This has to happen in the final hours right before launch, ideally within about 2 hours, maybe even refreshing again just before you power up the drone. So that H-2 to H-1 window is critical.
Why so close to launch time?
Because things like VIP movement TFRs or restrictions for pop-up events like emergency response or aerial firefighting often get issued with very little notice. Checking the day before isn't good enough for TFRs.
Okay, so in that tactical window, what are you checking specifically?
You are pulling the absolute latest TFRs and NOTAMs directly from the official government sources. That's TFR.saa.gov in the U.S. or the NAV Canada NOTAM site. No relying solely on third-party apps here for the definitive check.
Go to the source.
Go to this source. Then you confirm all the altitudes again, doing that vital MSL versus AGL conversion for your specific launch site elevation and your planned flight height. Document that comparison against any nearby airspace limits.
Do the math, write it down.
Yep. And then you can verify things again in your LANC app if you need controlled airspace access, or your NAV drone app in Canada.
But you're saying that app check is secondary.
It's an important cross-check, and it's where you get your LANC drone authorization if needed. But remember, the app is primarily a visualization tool and the interface for that one type of authorization, controlled airspace. It might not always show the very latest TFR or security restriction instantly. The official government portal is the final word. If the app shows green but the TFR site shows red, red wins.
Got it. Source of truth is the official site. Now, what about those restricted areas, our ## or CYRs? If the strategic check showed one nearby, how do you handle that in the tactical window?
Okay, first, if it's a prohibited area, ###, you just stay away. Treat it as always closed. But for restricted areas, you need to actively check the status right before your flight.
And how do you do that? Call someone.
Yes. You use the controlling agency contact information you found during your strategic planning from the chart or SUA website at DAH. You call them on the listed frequency or phone number.
And what do you say? What's the procedure for that call?
You identify yourself. This is drone operation. Your call sign name requesting status of restricted area ###. You ask specifically, is ### currently active or hot?
Okay. And what do you need to record from that call?
You need to log the time of the call, the frequency or number you used, and critically, the name or operating initials of the controller or person you spoke to who gave you the status.
Get their name.
Absolutely. If they say the area is active or hot and you still need to enter, which is rare for drones but possible for some missions, you need their explicit authorization, which they will either grant or deny. That entire exchange needs to be logged. If they say it's hot and don't give you permission, you do not fly there, period. If they say it's cold or inactive, you log that too with their identifier and you're clear for that restriction.
That documentation seems key for proving you did your due diligence.
It's essential CYA cover your assets. Okay, we also need to touch on a big shift happening with drone technology itself regarding geofencing.
Right. The manufacturers are changing how their no-fly zones work.
Yes. Major vendors, DJI being the most prominent, started around 2025, particularly in the US, moving away from hard locks that physically prevent takeoff in restricted zones. They're shifting more towards advisory warnings that the pilot can potentially dismiss.
So the drone might warn you, hey, you're near an airport, but it won't necessarily stop you from taking off anymore.
Increasingly, yes, that's the trend, and the implication is huge.
Which is?
The responsibility for compliance rests 100% solely and explicitly on you, the pilot in command. You cannot rely on the drone software to save you from making a mistake. Your firmware won't stop you from busting airspace. Only your own pre-flight checks using official data will.
The training wheels are coming off, so to speak. You have to know the rules yourself.
Exactly. The apps become advisors, not enforcers. Okay, one more point on staying current. The NOTAM system itself is evolving.
Right. You mentioned notice to airmen versus notice to air missions.
Yeah, the FAA is in the process of rolling out a modernized system called the NOTAM Management Service, or NMS. This is a multi-year transition expected to run through 2026 or so. And interestingly, as part of that, effective February 10th, 2025, they actually reverted the official term back to Notice to Airmen, NOTAM.
Back to NOTAM from notice to air missions.
Absolutely.
Okay. Why does this modernization matter to pilots?
The goal is better dissemination, clearer formatting, making the critical safety information easier to find and understand, hopefully less ambiguity. But the key takeaway during this transition period is simple.
Which is?
If you ever see conflicting information, maybe your planning app says one thing, but the official FAA portal says another. The official portal is always the source of truth, and you need to document that you checked the official source.
Which leads perfectly into the final step of this whole process. Keeping records.
Yes, archiving and documentation. Your compliance work isn't really complete until you have the proof saved.
What should that proof pack include?
For a professional operation, you need comprehensive logs. That includes any LAANC or NAV drone authorization IDs you received, the specific NOTAM numbers you reviewed, maybe even referencing your RTASU breakdown notes for key TFRs.
The notes from calling ATC about restricted areas too.
Absolutely. Time, frequency, controller ID, status given, and crucially, screenshots. Take time-stamped screenshots of the official TFR map and NOTAM searches from right before your flight, that H1 refresh. Show the area was clear or show the restriction you were complying with.
That documentation packet is basically your evidence if anyone ever questions your flight.
It's your first and best line of defense. It shows you followed a professional process and verified the airspace was legal for your operation at that specific time. #outtrack outro. So if we boil this entire deep dive down, the single biggest takeaway about managing special use airspace and TFRs is probably this. You have to accept that authorizations stack up, like layers. And the most restrictive layer, the strictest rule, always wins. No exceptions. LAANC or NAV drone. That gets you permission for the altitude and controlled airspace. But TFRs, security restrictions, prohibited areas, They decide if you can even be in that location at all.
So what does this all really mean for you, the pilot listening to this?
Yeah.
I guess it means whether you're planning a simple roof inspection that happens to be near an active MOA, or you're trying to get some dramatic B-roll near a wildfire up in Canada, your compliance, your legal permission to fly, it's not outsourced. It's not handled by the drone's firmware or some fancy map overlay on an app. The ultimate gatekeeper is always you.
You, the pilot in command, armed with the latest verified data from the official regulatory sources. That's the standard.
Okay, so let's leave you with a final thought to chew on, something provocative maybe. Think back to that MSL versus AGL trap we discussed.
Yeah, the altitude conversion puzzle.
Right. So consider this scenario. A restricted area floor is charted on your map at 2,600 feet MSL. Your launch site, where you're standing, has an elevation of 2,200 feet MSL.
Okay, so the R area floor is 400 feet above your ground level.
Exactly. Now, what is the precise AGL margin you need to calculate and document before you fly, ensuring you stay below that 2,600 MSL floor, assuming the R area is cold and you can fly underneath it? How high AGL can you actually fly from your 2,200 MSL spot?
It's not just 400 feet AGL, is it? Because your drone measures AGL from the ground directly below it, which might change if the terrain slopes.
And what if you needed to operate at, say, 300 feet AGL for your mission? That would put your drone at 2,500 feet MSL, 2,200 plus 300. You're still below the 2,600 MSL floor of the R area. But could that 2,500 MSL altitude put you in conflict with, say, the floor of Class B airspace overlying the area, even if the R area itself is cold?
Checking against other airspace shells, too.
Right. It's that constant mental juggling, the conversion, the verification against all applicable airspace rules, documenting it all. That's really what separates a casual flyer from a true professional pilot who can guarantee mission safety and compliance every single time. Something to think about.
That's a wrap on today's mission, Commander. See above. Go beyond. Get ahead. For more training, tools, and intel, head to skycommander.ca. If you learned something new, share it, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star debrief.